She said, "You've succeeded because you tried to fail and you did. So you succeeded as you failed. If Jesus would answer any question you asked, what would you want to know?" And she said, "Can you answer more questions? Or maybe, what is the purpose of mosquitoes? If Jesus were to appear before to ask you a question, what do you think it would be?" Hard to say. I'm not Jesus, so it's hard for me to guess. What is your wish or desire for the students of WWVA? That each person can find a personal connection with God and to grow closer to Him. So to introduce to you someone who is always very kind and brightens up the halls with her smiles, today's speaker is Katie Wagner.
Thank you, Cassie. So, God is with you. Most of us should know Psalms 23, verse 4, which says, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." At first glance, some people might think that this means when life is tough and you're afraid that God's going to protect you and comfort you and never leave your side. That's what I thought it meant too. That was always the way I understood this verse when I heard it. But until this past summer, I realized that this little verse could mean so much more to me, personally and spiritually. Let me read it again. "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." I used to see this verse as a promise that God's going to make everything that's going wrong okay, and I'm going to be turning out fine in the end. But now I see it as a promise that God's going to always be with me and help me get through stuff that isn't fine at all or may never be okay. Let's put this verse into another context with two stories, one from the Bible and one from my own journey. The first story is about Israel, and the verses are found in Deuteronomy chapter 31. So, Israel has fled Egypt. There they are, this massive group of people who have fled a country, been chased by Pharaoh, and now are wandering in the middle of nowhere. They can't wait to cross into the Jordan area. They have complained to Moses about they're hungry and they're thirsty and how some things were better in Egypt. Then, after all those years of wandering, in Deuteronomy 31, verse 2, Moses says this to Israel: "I'm now 120 years old. I can't lead you anymore. The Lord told me I would not cross the Jordan River. The Lord your God will lead you across himself." Now picture yourself as an Israelite in the middle of the desert for years, not always sure God knows what he's doing. Moses is the one who led you there. He's been the one talking to God the whole time, getting your food and your water, and he's giving your rules to you. He's been your connection to the future, and even when you complain, he's the one who makes it right with God. And he's just told you he's done. Tell me, what would be on your mind? Would you be afraid? Then, in Deuteronomy 31, verse 6, Moses gives the Israelites what I guess we could say is the ultimate pep talk. He says, "Be strong, take courage, don't be intimidated, don't give them a second thought, because God, your God, is striding ahead of you. He's right there with you. He won't let you down. He won't leave you." Looking closely, we can see that Psalms 23, verse 4, and Deuteronomy 31, 6 have two main things in common. First, they both emphasize to not be afraid. Second, they both tell us that God will never leave. In the Psalms verse, we hear David, a mighty king, say he will not fear, for God is with him. And in the Deuteronomy verse, we hear Moses encouraging Israel to remember not to fear, because God is, has been, and will always be with them. Now the second story is just a little bit more personal, because it's mine. It was an ordinary summer Friday. The sun was shining, and I woke up with that peaceful summer feeling. You know that feeling when you have nothing planned, nothing to worry about? No homework? Like usual, I went downstairs, and I was surprised to see my mom still home and not at work like she usually was in the morning. Mom was on the phone with an employee from Giordano's Pizza, a restaurant based in Chicago. She was planning a Chicago-style pizza dinner for her office the following week, and she just wanted to order the pizzas for delivery here in Walla Walla. As I listened to her, I realized that the normal website order form wasn't functioning properly, so she just had to call the restaurant. What I heard next changed everything about this day. Mom said, "You have no idea how much your good customer service means to me. My mother-in-law is dying, and we're not sure how much time she has left, and I'm just trying to get these little details taken care of right away." Suddenly, that peaceful summer day feeling was gone. I was in shock. Grandma's dying? I had to replay Mom's words in my head until they just began to sink in. You see, my grandma Kara had Parkinson's disease, which affects the nerve cells in the brains that produce dopamine. Now, dopamine is important in the process of thinking, movement, and without it, eventually the body will just shut down. I was born after Grandma was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, so I always knew she had it. And occasionally, I would notice that she would have more trouble doing little everyday things. But I never thought about what would happen to her or when it would happen. The last few years before she died were especially difficult for our family. Parkinson's made it so she couldn't walk, couldn't talk. She'd be afraid of little things a lot, and sometimes she couldn't even eat. Things would mostly go downhill, but very rarely, Grandma would surprise us with improvements. Our family learned not to take for granted the good times that came when her health seemed better. For example, I remember one time it was her birthday, and we had all gotten her little gifts, like scraps of fabric that she could keep her hands busy with. We must have been talking about shopping because my mom, aunt, and cousins and I were all sitting around the table, and out of the blue, Grandma interrupted us with a smile and said, "Yesterday, I went to the store, and I bought something that made me feel like a rebel." And at one time, a friend and I had made my grandparents dinner for community service. We delivered it to them, and I went over to talk to Grandma and just tell her how I was learning to cook and sew. When I mentioned sewing, she brightened up with a big smile. She loved to sew. She made beautiful quilts and beautiful dresses for us granddaughters when we were little. And she always loved to cook with us, no matter what we were making. I told her I was learning to work the sewing machine, and she smiled at me. Those were the moments, to me, where the illness just disappeared, and I could see my grandma without her being in pain. But it hadn't really dawned on me at all that she would die. After hearing my mom's conversation with the pizza guy that day, I did my usual morning chores in sort of a shock mode. Around noon or so, we went over to their house to swim in their pool and to see Grandma, just like we had always done during the summers. I was surprised to see my grandma's sister and my cousin there. They'd come to Walla to see us and just help out and take care of everything. We had a fun afternoon, but slowly, over the day, I began to really worry. I became afraid. I was told that my grandma's brother and his family were flying in last minute from Hawaii. It was all sinking in. She really was dying. We all gathered at their house for dinner, and we all took turns going back and seeing her. It took me a little while to finally get up just a little bit of courage to go see her. But as soon as I did, I was able to accept it. I began to realize that she would be out of pain soon, and the next thing she would see after she passed was Jesus. There were also a few times that night when I thought, "Okay, God, where are you? What's happening?" After I saw her, I felt all sorts of feelings. I was afraid to see someone die. I was afraid of everyone being sad. I was worried about my family. I was afraid I couldn't handle it. I felt like I needed to leave. I needed a break from everything. So Mom took me and my sister home. Before we left, I went back to say goodbye to Grandma for what I realized could be the very last time. I quietly walked back to her room, and I leaned down next to her. I didn't know what to say, because what do you say to someone you're about to lose? I told her I loved her, and I just said goodbye. As I was leaving, walking out the door, in fact, a feeling told me to go back. It was like a whisper in my heart. I didn't question it. I went back again, this time knowing exactly what I would say. I leaned down next to her again and I said, I, Katie, love you, Grandma. We all do. Your whole family does. Jesus loves you. I love you. Goodbye. I love you. I felt like I couldn't say I loved her enough. I wanted her to know for sure. After I said that, something happened that I will never forget. Probably the most meaningful thing that has ever happened in my life. After I said I love you for the final time, she tried to open her eyes. She tried so hard that even though she didn't get them open, you could tell she was trying her absolute hardest. The whole way home, I just cried. I remember closing the door to my room and I just sobbed. I didn't know who to talk to. I was afraid of what would happen next, and I was afraid to see my family sad and miserable. I kept talking to God, asking him why, and I just didn't know what to do. I didn't feel like God was protecting me, and I didn't feel like the problem was going away. It was just getting worse. Then I remembered someone who I now know God put in my life to come and comfort me that day. I messaged a friend who had been aware that Grandma had Parkinson's disease. First only saying, she's dying. My friend immediately, when I say immediately, I mean immediately, responded. Even though we weren't in the same place, she was the shoulder I cried on. I told her that my mom had told me on the way home that God had angels around Grandma and she wouldn't be in pain anymore. My friend responded saying God had an army of angels around Grandma and God would let an amazing person like her die without a fight. And she was right. Grandma fought Parkinson's disease as hard as she possibly could for as long as she could. 17 years. She did pass away that night, surrounded by her family. My mom took us back to the house where the whole family just gathered in her room and we prayed. There were tears, lots of grief. I was so worried and maybe I was anxious, but I wasn't afraid. Back to Psalms 23:4. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I now notice that this verse doesn't promise me protection, or that all will be safe, or that there's a happy ending for everything here on this earth, because there's not. Even David and Moses, both mighty leaders for God, had imperfect, painful lives. Yet they both point out that with God, we don't have to fear the bad because he is with us. I now read Psalms 23:4 as, God, even though my life is dark and I can't see you in anything, I am not afraid because you are with me. You have, you always will, and you are always just right here next to me. God has revealed himself to me and taught me something through my grandma's life in the months since her death. It's still hard. There are some days when I miss her lots. But knowing I have a God bigger than any illness, threat, or trouble helps me the absolute most. He's a God who never left Joseph, even during kidnapping and captivity. He stayed with the Israelites even when they behaved badly and disobeyed him many times. He was with Esther when she was chosen to be queen and could have died because she stood up for her people. He's a God who stayed with David even during David's darkest, most sinful moments. He's the God who stayed with Paul and Silas and Stephen and all the early church leaders when they were being persecuted. He's a God who, when just 1 out of 100 sheep goes missing, he goes after it. He's a God who lived a perfect, sinless, holy life just to be right here next to you and me. And so now I know what Moses and David were saying, that nothing's going to keep God away from us. Nothing. My closing thoughts are best shared in this song. Moses said it. David said it. I'm saying it. And maybe after listening to this song, you can say it too. God will never leave. He's been with you all this time.